Commander Zethkar of the Dominion fleet gazed through the viewport of his flagship, watching the peaceful blue-green world rotating slowly below. According to their intelligence, this was just another human agricultural colony, barely worth the fuel it would take to glass it from orbit. But orders were orders, and High Command had been very specific about eliminating every human settlement they encountered. The war had been raging for 3 standard years now. What started as a territorial dispute over mining rights in the Kepler sector had escalated into a full-scale galactic conflict. The humans, despite being relative newcomers to the galactic community, had proven surprisingly resilient. Their military wasn't the largest, nor did they possess the most advanced technology, but they had something that unnerved the other species, an almost reckless determination that bordered on insanity. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," reported Lieutenant Vexhal, her scaled fingers dancing across the communication console. "It appears to be coming from their primary settlement." Zethkar's 4 eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a middle-aged human male with graying hair and dirt-stained clothing. He looked like exactly what their intelligence suggested, a simple farmer, probably the colony administrator. The human's face was calm, almost serene, as if he were discussing the weather rather than facing imminent annihilation. "Greetings," the human said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Zethkar's translator identified as originating from Earth's North American continent. "I'm Thomas Chen, administrator of New Eden Colony. I assume you're here about the war." Zethkar stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across the bridge. "Human, I am Commander Zethkar of the 47th Dominion Battle Fleet. Your species has been declared an enemy of the Galactic Dominion. Prepare for orbital bombardment. You have 15 minutes to make peace with whatever deities you worship." Thomas Chen actually smiled, in response to this death sentence. "Commander, before you do something you'll regret, I'd like to extend an invitation. Why don't you and a few of your officers come down for dinner? My wife makes an excellent pot roast, and we've got some vegetables from our garden that I think you'd find interesting." The bridge fell silent. Several officers exchanged glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. Even Zethkar's jaw dropped slightly, an impressive feat considering his species' facial structure. "You're inviting us to dinner?" Zethkar asked, certain his translator had malfunctioned. "That's right," Thomas replied, clasping his hands behind his back. "See, Commander, there's something about this colony that your intelligence reports probably missed. We're not just farmers here. Well, we are farmers, but we're also something else. Something your people should probably know about before they make any irreversible decisions." Lieutenant Vexhal leaned toward her commander. "Sir, this could be a trap. Humans are known for their deception tactics." But Zethkar found himself curious despite his better judgment. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered a response quite like this. Most species either begged for mercy or hurled defiant threats when faced with orbital bombardment. This casual invitation to dinner was unprecedented. What could a simple agricultural colony possibly show us that would change our mission parameters? Zethkar asked. Thomas's smile widened slightly. "Well, that's the thing, Commander. We're not exactly a simple agricultural colony. Oh, we grow crops all right, some of the finest in the galaxy, if I do say so myself. But we also grow other things. Things that might make you reconsider not just attacking this planet, but continuing this war altogether." The human paused, looking directly into the camera with eyes that held far more knowledge than a simple farmer should possess. "You see, Commander, New Eden isn't just our colony's name, it's also our project designation. We're what you might call a specialized research facility. The kind that develops new strains of crops, new agricultural techniques, new ways to feed people." Thomas's expression grew more serious. "We also develop other things. Things that grow. Things that spread. Things that your people really don't want released into their ecosystems." A chill ran down Zethkar's spine, though he couldn't quite understand why. "Explain yourself, human." "Biological warfare, Commander. Specifically, biological warfare designed to target non-human species while leaving humans completely unharmed. You're familiar with the concept, I'm sure." Your own people have used similar weapons against smaller species during your expansion campaigns. The bridge became deathly quiet. Biological weapons were banned under 17 different galactic treaties, but that didn't mean they weren't developed and stockpiled by various governments. The humans, however, were supposed to be too new to galactic politics to have advanced that far. "You're bluffing," Sethkar said, but his voice lacked conviction. Thomas shrugged. "Maybe I am. Maybe I'm just a simple farmer trying to save his crops and his neighbors. Or maybe I'm telling the truth, and you're about to bombard a facility that contains enough engineered pathogens to wipe out every non-human species in this sector of the galaxy." He leaned closer to the camera. "The thing about biological weapons, Commander, is that they're really hard to contain once they're released. Orbital bombardment tends to scatter things rather effectively across a wide area." One of Zethkar's officers stepped forward. "Sir, perhaps we should contact High Command before proceeding." But Thomas raised a hand. "Before you do that, Commander, let me make something clear. I'm not threatening you. Quite the opposite, actually. I'm inviting you down here to show you something that could end this war in a way that benefits everyone, including your people." "And what might that be?" "Food, Commander. Real, abundant, nutritious food. You see, while we were developing those nasty biological weapons, and yes, they do exist, and yes, they are as terrible as I've implied, we also made some other discoveries. We figured out how to grow crops that can thrive in almost any environment. Crops that can feed entire planetary populations with minimal resources. Crops that could solve the food shortages that are driving half the conflicts in this galaxy." Thomas gestured behind him, and the camera panned to show vast fields stretching to the horizon. But these weren't ordinary crops. The plants were massive, with fruits and grains that seemed almost too large to be real. The colors were vibrant, almost glowing in the alien sunlight. "The war between our species started over mining rights, but we both know that's not what it's really about," Thomas continued. "It's about resources. Food, energy, living space. The Dominion is expanding because your homeworlds can't support your growing population. You need new planets, new resources, new food sources." He gestured again, and the camera focused on a particular section of the field where plants seemed to be growing in soil that looked almost barren. "What if I told you that we've developed crops that could turn your desert worlds into garden planets? What if I told you that we've created plants that can grow in the vacuum of space, that can terraform dead worlds in a matter of years rather than centuries?" Zethkar stared at the transmission, his mind racing. If the human was telling the truth about either the weapons or the agricultural advances, this changed everything. The Dominion's expansion wasn't driven by conquest for its own sake, it was driven by necessity. His people were facing resource shortages that would become critical within a generation. "Why would you share such technology with an enemy?" Sethkar asked. "Because we're not really enemies, Commander. We're just two species trying to survive in a hostile galaxy. Your people attack our colonies because you need resources. Our people fight back because we don't want to die. But what if there was a third option? What if there was enough for everyone?" Thomas's expression became earnest, almost pleading. "I'm offering you a chance to see something that could change the course of this war. Not through superior firepower or devastating weapons, but through something much more powerful, hope." The human administrator looked directly into the camera one more time. "So, Commander, what do you say? Will you accept my invitation to dinner? I promise you, it will be the most important meal of your life. And possibly the most important meal in galactic history." Zethkar looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. Some showed skepticism, others curiosity, and a few displayed outright fear. He had three options: proceed with the bombardment and risk releasing biological weapons that could devastate his own people, retreat and report the situation to High Command, or accept the humans' bizarre invitation. "Sir?" Lieutenant Vexhal prompted quietly. Zethkar made his decision. "Prepare a shuttle. Small team only, myself, Lieutenant Vexhal, and Security Chief Thraknor. If this is a trap, I don't want to lose the entire command staff." "And the bombardment, sir?" Zethkar looked back at the peaceful world below, its fields clearly visible even from orbit. Postponed. If the humans are lying about their biological weapons, we can always glass the planet later. But, if they're telling the truth? He paused, considering the implications. If they're telling the truth, then, we need to be very, very careful about our next move. As the shuttle bay prepared for departure, Zethkar found himself wondering what exactly he was walking into. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered a situation quite like this. The humans had a reputation for unconventional tactics, but this was beyond anything in their known playbook. The shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, passing through clouds that seemed unusually dense and colorful. As they broke through the lower cloud layer, the landscape below became clearly visible, and Zethkar's breath caught in his throat. The agricultural fields stretched endlessly in all directions, but they weren't like anything he had ever seen. The crops grew in perfect geometric patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. Plants of impossible sizes reached toward the sky, their leaves reflecting the sunlight in ways that created rainbow patterns across the landscape. "Sir," the shuttle pilot reported, "I'm detecting some unusual atmospheric readings. The air composition includes several compounds I don't recognize." "Dangerous?" Zethkar asked. "Unknown, sir. But the humans are clearly breathing it without protective equipment." As they approached the landing coordinates Thomas had provided, Zethkar could see the human settlement. It was larger than their intelligence had suggested, with buildings that seemed to blend seamlessly into the landscape. People moved about their daily activities, seemingly unconcerned by the massive warship orbiting overhead. The shuttle touched down in a clear area near the settlement's center, and Zethkar found himself face to face with Thomas Chen in person. The human looked exactly as he had on the transmission, unremarkable, middle-aged, with the weathered hands of someone who worked the soil. But his eyes held depths that spoke of knowledge far beyond that of a simple farmer. "Commander Zethkar," Thomas said, stepping forward with his hand extended in the human gesture of greeting. "Welcome to New Eden. I hope you're hungry." Zethkar hesitated for a moment before accepting the human's handshake. Thomas's grip was firm but not aggressive, the hands of someone accustomed to hard work. As they walked toward the settlement, Zethkar couldn't help but notice the details that their orbital scans had missed. The plants surrounding the settlement weren't just unusually large, they were impossibly diverse. Species that should never be able to grow in the same climate thrived side by side. Arctic fruit trees stood next to desert succulents, while tropical vines wrapped around what appeared to be modified grain stalks that reached nearly 10 meters in height. "Impressive, isn't it?" Thomas said, noticing the commander's attention. "We've spent the last 5 years developing these hybrid strains. Each one is designed to maximize nutritional output while minimizing resource requirements." Lieutenant Vexel stepped closer to examine a nearby plant. "These genetic modifications, they should be impossible. The chromosomal structures of these different species are completely incompatible." Thomas smiled. "That's what we thought too, initially. Then, we discovered some interesting properties of quantum-level genetic manipulation. Turns out, if you can alter matter at the subatomic level, traditional biological limitations become much more flexible." Security Chief Thraknor, a massive warrior whose species was known for their combat prowess, growled low in his throat. "You speak of technologies beyond current galactic understanding. How did a human agricultural colony acquire such knowledge?" "That's a long story, Chief Thraknor. One that begins with humanity's tendency to approach problems from unconventional angles." Thomas gestured for them to continue walking. "You see, when humans first encountered the galactic community, we realized we were behind in almost every technological aspect. Military, transportation, communication, energy generation, we were basically primitives with barely functional space travel. They approached the settlement's main building, a structure that seemed to grow organically from the ground rather than being constructed upon it. The walls had a living quality, as if they were made from some kind of cultivated material rather than traditional building components. So we did what humans do best," Thomas continued. "We looked for areas where our particular way of thinking might give us advantages. While other species focused on advancing their existing technologies, we started from scratch and asked fundamental questions. Questions like, What if the building blocks of life could be rearranged at the quantum level? As they entered the building, Zethkar was struck by the interior design. The ceiling was transparent, but, instead of showing sky, it displayed what appeared to be a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Stars pulsed with different colors, and connecting lines showed various trade routes and territorial boundaries. "This is our situation room," Thomas explained. "From here, we monitor crop yields, weather patterns, soil conditions, and..." He paused meaningfully. "Galactic political developments." Vexal studied the display with professional interest. "Those trade routes, some of them aren't on any official star charts. How do you have access to classified shipping information?" "Because we supply food to most of those routes," Thomas replied simply. "New Eden isn't just a research facility, Lieutenant. We're also the primary agricultural supplier for 17 different systems, including several in Dominion space." The implications hit Zethkar like a physical blow. "You've been feeding our people." "For the last 2 years, yes. About 30% of the food consumed in Dominion territory originates from human agricultural colonies. Mostly through intermediary trading companies, so your people probably didn't realize the source." Thomas activated a control panel, and the galactic display zoomed in on Dominion space. Red indicators showed food shipment routes, and they were extensive. Thraknor stepped forward, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon. "You could have poisoned our entire population." Thomas turned to face the security chief calmly. "We could have. We had countless opportunities. But we didn't." "Do you know why?" The 3 Dominion officers remained silent, waiting for his explanation. "Because we're not interested in genocide, Chief. We're interested in survival. And we realized something that apparently escaped your military strategists: this war is unsustainable for both our species." Thomas activated another display, this one showing population and resource statistics for both human and Dominion territories. "Your people are expanding because you're facing food shortages. Your population has grown by 40% over the last century, but your agricultural output has only increased by 12%. At current consumption rates, you'll face critical shortages within 2 generations." The display shifted to show human territories. Humans, meanwhile, have the opposite problem. "We've developed agricultural techniques that can produce massive food surpluses, but we lack the territory and population to utilize them effectively. We're also facing military pressure from multiple galactic powers who see us as a threat." Zethkar studied the data, his military mind immediately grasping the strategic implications. "You're suggesting an alliance." "I'm suggesting something more than that, Commander. I'm suggesting a fundamental shift in how species interact in this galaxy." Thomas gestured to another part of the room, where a large table was set for dinner. "But, first, let's eat. I find that complex negotiations go better on a full stomach." The dinner was unlike anything the Dominion officers had ever experienced. The food was not only delicious but seemed to provide an almost immediate sense of vitality and well-being. Fruits that tasted like combinations of flavors that shouldn't exist. Vegetables with textures that seemed to change as they chewed. Grains that provided a sense of fullness with remarkably small portions. "The nutritional density is incredible," Vexal observed, analyzing her meal with a portable scanner. "These foods contain essential nutrients that are rare in most galactic food sources. Some of these compounds, I don't even recognize them." "That's because they don't exist naturally," Thomas explained, serving what appeared to be a modified form of earth corn that glowed faintly with bioluminescence. "We've created entirely new nutritional compounds. Foods that don't just sustain life, but enhance it. Increased mental acuity, improved physical performance, extended lifespan, enhanced disease resistance." Thraknor looked up from his plate suspiciously. "You're experimenting on us." "I'm feeding you, Chief. The same food that my family eats every day. The same food that we've been shipping to your people for 2 years without any negative effects." Thomas leaned back in his chair. "The experimental part isn't what you're eating, it's what you're about to see." As if on cue, the lights in the dining area dimmed, and the walls became transparent. Outside, the agricultural fields were illuminated by some form of bioluminescent lighting system, creating a landscape that looked like something from a dream. This is just one colony, gentlemen. One small research facility on a minor world in an unimportant system. But, from this single location, we feed millions of beings across dozens of systems. And, we barely scratched the surface of what's possible. Thomas stood and walked to a window that provided a panoramic view of the fields. Imagine worlds that are currently barren wastelands transformed into garden planets within a decade. Imagine food that not only sustains life but makes it better. Imagine agricultural systems that actually improve the environment rather than depleting it. He turned back to face his guests. Now imagine what we could accomplish if, instead of shooting at each other, our species worked together. Zethkar felt a strange sensation, something between hope and vertigo. The implications of what Thomas was describing were staggering. What exactly are you proposing? Joint colonies, Commander. Shared technology. Cooperative development. Your people provide population, territory, and organizational expertise. Humans provide agricultural innovation and production capabilities. Together, we could transform this galaxy from a collection of competing powers fighting over limited resources into something unprecedented, a true abundance economy. The room fell silent as the three Dominion officers contemplated this proposal. Everything they had been taught about human intentions and capabilities was being challenged. There's something else, Thomas continued. Something I mentioned earlier about biological weapons. I wasn't lying about that, but I also wasn't telling you the complete truth. Thraknor's hand moved to his weapon again, but Thomas raised a calming hand. We did develop biological weapons capable of targeting non-human species. But we also developed the countermeasures. Universal vaccines, genetic therapies, atmospheric scrubbers, everything needed to neutralize such weapons if they're ever deployed. Thomas's expression became serious. We developed them not as weapons of war, but as tools of peace. Explain, Zethkar commanded. Think about it, Commander. If humans possess both the ultimate biological weapon and the ultimate defense against it, what does that make us strategically? The realization dawned on Zethkar slowly. Indispensable. Exactly. We become the species that everyone needs as an ally and no one can afford to have as an enemy. Not because we're the strongest militarily, but because we control technologies that are essential for survival. Thomas returned to his seat. But, here's the thing, we don't want to rule the galaxy through fear. We want to transform it through cooperation. The biological weapons exist as insurance, but the real power is in what you've seen here tonight. The power to turn scarcity into abundance, conflict into cooperation, war into peace. Vexhal leaned forward. You said this facility could end the war in 10 minutes. How? Thomas smiled. Because, Lieutenant, everything I've shown you tonight, the impossible crops, the nutritional enhancements, the population statistics, the trade route data, all of it is being transmitted in real time to every major government in the galaxy. The Dominion officers stiffened in surprise. About an hour ago, when your shuttle entered our atmosphere, it automatically began broadcasting everything it recorded. The conversations, the visual data, the atmospheric analysis, even the nutritional scans of your dinner. That information is currently being received by military commands, government leaders, and scientific institutions across dozens of systems. Zethkar stood abruptly. You've been recording us without permission. I've been documenting the truth, Commander. And now every major power in the galaxy knows that humans possess technologies that make this war not just unnecessary, but counterproductive. Thomas remained seated, his expression calm. By the time you return to your ship, your high command will have received a complete data package detailing everything you've seen here. Thomas activated a communication device on the table. They'll also have received our formal proposal for ending the war. Complete technological sharing agreements, joint colony development projects, cooperative research initiatives, and mutual defense pacts against any power that chooses to continue aggressive expansion. The device projected a holographic display showing communication channels lighting up across the galaxy. Messages were being transmitted and received at an unprecedented rate. The choice isn't yours anymore, Commander. It's not even your High Command's choice. It's a choice that's being made right now by every government that receives our data. They can choose to continue fighting a war for limited resources, or they can choose to join us in creating unlimited abundance. Thomas stood and walked to a wall display that showed real-time communication traffic. And, based on the response patterns we're seeing, I'd say the choice is becoming pretty clear. No rational government continues a war when presented with a better alternative that benefits everyone involved. The implications were staggering. In the span of a single evening, the humans had essentially forced every major galactic power to reconsider the fundamental basis of interstellar relations. 10 minutes, Thomas said quietly. That's all it took for the data to reach the key decision makers. 10 minutes to show them that everything they thought they knew about human capabilities was wrong. 10 minutes to present them with an alternative that makes war obsolete. Zethkar's communication device began beeping frantically. Incoming messages from High Command, from the Home System, from allied governments. All demanding immediate updates, all containing variations of the same message: stand down and await further orders. Your people are practical, Commander, Thomas said, noting the flood of messages. They understand strategic realities. When presented with a choice between continuing a costly war for limited gains or joining an alliance that provides unlimited benefits, the decision becomes obvious. The display showed communication patterns spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. Each government that received the data began transmitting to their allies, their enemies, their neutral neighbors. Within hours, every major civilization would know that the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic politics had changed forever. Thomas looked out at his fields one more time. This is what happens when you stop thinking about resources as things to fight over and start thinking about them as things to create together. This is what happens when you realize that the real power isn't in weapons or territory, but in making life better for everyone. He turned back to face the 3 Dominion officers, who were still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. The war isn't ending because one side defeated the other, gentlemen. It's ending because both sides just discovered there's something much better than victory. 6 months after what historians would later call the New Eden dinner, Commander Zethkar stood in the same observation deck of his flagship, but the view below had changed dramatically. The blue-green world of New Eden was no longer a target for orbital bombardment. It was the site of the largest interspecies construction project in galactic history. Massive orbital platforms hung in space around the planet, their gleaming structures visible even from the ship's position several thousand kilometers away. Ships from dozens of different species moved in carefully coordinated patterns, transporting materials, equipment, and personnel to the growing complex below. Sir, Lieutenant Vexel reported from her position at the communications console, we're receiving the morning status report from the New Eden Agricultural Consortium. Production is up another 12% from last week. Zethkar nodded, still amazed by how quickly everything had changed. What Thomas Chen had accomplished in those critical 10 minutes had indeed ended the war, but that had been only the beginning. The real transformation had taken months of careful negotiation, technological integration, and the kind of cooperation that most galactic political theorists had considered impossible. Any word from the Home System about the new colony proposals? Zethkar asked. The Council has approved 17 new joint agricultural colonies, Vexel replied, scanning through the data streams. They're requesting immediate deployment of our agricultural specialists to begin site preparation. Zethkar smiled, an expression that would have been unthinkable during his military service just months earlier. He was no longer Commander Zethkar of the 47th Dominion Battle Fleet. He was now Director Zethkar of the New Eden Agricultural Development Program, and his fleet consisted of cargo ships, research vessels, and construction platforms rather than warships. The transition hadn't been easy for everyone. Many career military officers from all species had struggled to adapt to their new roles. But the benefits had become undeniable so quickly that resistance had melted away like ice in a star's corona. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The holographic display activated, revealing Thomas Chen in what appeared to be a mobile laboratory. Behind him, Zethkar could see vast greenhouse structures stretching to the horizon. Director Zethkar, Thomas said with the easy familiarity that had developed between them over the months. I hope you're ready for some interesting news. At this point, Thomas, I'm prepared for anything you might show me. Your people have already redefined impossible several times over. Thomas laughed. Well, this one might surprise even you. We've had a breakthrough in our terraforming research that's going to change everything. Again. The display shifted to show what appeared to be a barren, rocky world, the kind of dead planet that was typically considered worthless by galactic standards. This is Kepler 442c, one of the worlds we've been experimenting with. 6 months ago, it had no atmosphere to speak of, no water, no organic compounds. Basically a large asteroid. The image changed, showing the same world but now covered in a thin but visible atmosphere. Clouds swirled around mountain ranges, and there were clear signs of surface water. We introduced our modified atmospheric processors 3 months ago. Plants that literally consume rock and convert it into breathable air, water that forms from chemical reactions with the mineral content, soil bacteria that transform dead stone into fertile ground. Sethkar stared at the display in disbelief. 3 months? It should take centuries to terraform a dead world. That's what we thought too, Thomas replied. But we discovered something interesting about accelerated biological processes when they're guided by quantum-level genetic programming. We're not just changing the planet's surface, we're actually altering its fundamental molecular structure. The display zoomed in to show surface details. What had been bare rock was now covered in vegetation. Not the struggling, sparse growth that might be expected on a newly terraformed world, but lush, abundant plant life that looked like it had been growing for decades. The really interesting part, Thomas continued, is that this isn't a slow process that will take generations to complete. We estimate that Kepler 442c will be fully habitable for multiple species within 18 months. Not marginally habitable, fully optimized for agricultural and residential development. Security Chief Thraknor, who had also transitioned into agricultural development and now served as Director of Colony Security, appeared on the transmission. Director Sethkar, the implications are staggering. We're looking at the ability to create new worlds almost on demand. The resource limitations that have driven galactic conflicts for millennia could become completely obsolete. The former military officer in Sethkar immediately grasped the strategic implications. Thomas, how many worlds could this process be applied to? We've identified over 3,000 candidate worlds in this sector alone, Thomas replied. Rocky planets with the right mineral compositions, failed colonies that were abandoned due to hostile environments, even large asteroids that could be converted into agricultural stations. The display showed a map of local space with potential worlds marked in green. There were so many that they almost obscured the star patterns. But here's the really remarkable part, Thomas continued. The process is scalable and self-sustaining. Once we establish the initial biological systems on a world, they become self-propagating. The plants and organisms we've developed actually improve the environment as they grow, making it easier for the next wave of terraforming organisms to take hold. Thomas's expression became more serious. Sethkar, we're looking at the possibility of transforming this entire sector of the galaxy within a decade. Every species that joins the consortium gains access to the technology. Every government that participates gets priority access to new worlds. The implications were staggering. Not just for the former enemies who had been fighting over limited resources, but for the entire galactic political structure. What about species that choose not to participate? Sethkar asked. That's where things get interesting, Thomas replied. We're already seeing some fascinating political developments. The hegemony worlds tried to remain neutral initially, preferring to continue their traditional expansion through conquest. But when their neighboring systems started reporting massive improvements in food security and living standards, their own populations began demanding access to consortium technologies. The display shifted to show political maps with changing territorial boundaries. Some were expansions, but others showed something unprecedented: voluntary territorial exchanges and cooperative development projects between former enemies. 3 different governments have actually requested membership in systems that are already controlled by other species, Thomas continued. They're willing to give up sovereignty in exchange for access to the agricultural and terraforming technologies. Vexhal leaned forward. They're abandoning the entire concept of territorial expansion. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. When you can create new worlds instead of conquering existing ones, the whole foundation of imperial politics becomes irrelevant. Why fight over somebody else's planet when you can build your own? The philosophical implications were as significant as the practical ones. For thousands of years, galactic civilization had been organized around the principle of competition for limited resources. Species fought for territory, for energy sources, for food production capabilities, for living space. But Thomas and his team had done something that seemed almost magical. They had made scarcity obsolete. "There's one more thing," Thomas said, and his expression became almost mischievous. "We've been working on a project that we think you'll find particularly interesting. Something specifically designed for your people." The display changed to show what appeared to be a massive space-based structure. Not a space station in the traditional sense, but something that looked almost organic, like a living habitat growing in the void. "Your species evolved in high-gravity environments with specific atmospheric requirements," Thomas explained. "Most of the worlds we're terraforming are optimized for multi-species habitation, which means they're not ideal for any single species. So we decided to try something different." The camera moved closer to the structure, revealing details that made Zethkar's breath catch. It wasn't just a habitat, it was a world. A completely artificial world specifically designed for Dominion physiology. We call them species-optimal habitats. Fully customized worlds that provide the perfect environment for specific species. The atmospheric composition, gravity, seasonal patterns, even the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, everything calibrated to provide ideal living conditions. Thomas's smile widened. "We've designed one for every species in the consortium. The humans get worlds with perfect Earth-like conditions. The Vectal get their preferred methane atmospheres. The Crystalline Federation gets mineral-rich worlds with their required silicon-based chemistry." The display showed multiple structures in various stages of construction, each clearly designed for different species requirements. "But the really interesting part is that they're not isolated," Thomas continued. "They're connected by transportation networks that allow easy interaction between species while maintaining optimal living environments for everyone." Zethkar realized he was looking at something that would have been considered pure fantasy just a year ago, a galaxy where every species could have not just adequate living space, but perfect living space, without taking it away from anyone else. "Thomas," he said quietly, "you're not just ending wars. You're making them impossible." "That was always the plan," Thomas replied. "Not through superior military force, but through superior thinking. When everyone has everything they need, what's left to fight about?" The transmission paused for a moment as Thomas consulted with someone off-camera. When he returned, his expression was excited. "Zethkar, I just received word from our deep space monitoring stations. We're detecting communication signals from 3 previously unknown civilizations beyond the current galactic exploration boundary. They're requesting information about the agricultural consortium." "How did they learn about us?" "Apparently, word spreads fast when you start transforming dead worlds into garden planets," Thomas said with a grin. "The electromagnetic signatures of our terraforming projects are visible from quite a distance. These civilizations want to know if the stories they're hearing about unlimited resources and cooperative development are actually true." The galaxy was changing faster than anyone had anticipated. What had started as a simple dinner invitation to prevent an orbital bombardment had triggered a transformation that was spreading beyond the boundaries of known space. "There's going to be a formal ceremony next week," Thomas continued. "The official signing of the Galactic Agricultural Accord. Every major government is sending representatives. They want to make it a celebration of the new era of cooperation." Thomas paused, his expression becoming more personal. "I'd like you to be there, Zethkar. Not as a military officer or a director or a representative of your government. As a friend. As someone who helped make this possible by choosing to accept a dinner invitation instead of proceeding with a bombardment." Zethkar felt an emotion that his species rarely experienced, profound gratitude mixed with something approaching wonder. "I'll be there." As the transmission ended, Zethkar remained at his observation post, watching the ships moving around New Eden. Each vessel represented not just cargo or personnel, but hope. Hope for abundance instead of scarcity, cooperation instead of conflict, creation instead of destruction. Lieutenant Vexal approached with a data pad. Sir, we're receiving requests from 17 different systems for immediate agricultural development assistance. Also, there's a personal message from your family on the home world. They're asking when you'll be able to visit the new human-designed agricultural facilities there. Zethkar smiled. His family, like most Dominion citizens, had initially been skeptical of cooperation with humans. But, when their food security increased, their living standards improved, and their future prospects brightened beyond anything their species had ever experienced, skepticism had quickly transformed into enthusiastic support. Schedule a visit for next month, he replied. I'd like to see what Thomas and his people have accomplished on our worlds. As he spoke, another ship appeared in the distance, this one bearing the markings of a species that had been neutral throughout the war. They were coming to join the consortium, adding their knowledge and capabilities to the growing alliance. In the space of 10 minutes, a dinner conversation had ended a galactic war. In the months that followed, it had ended the concept of war itself, at least among the species wise enough to recognize that abundance was better than conflict, that creation was more powerful than destruction, and that cooperation could accomplish what conquest never could. The galaxy would never be the same. And, for the first time in his long life, Zethkar believed that was going to be a very good thing.